Well, welcome everybody. We appreciate you being here. What is the future of humankind as it pertains to cars and mobility? Well, before I introduce the panelists with me today who will answer that question and a few others, I wanted to show you a quick video that McKinsey released this year, and it nicely summarizes some of the points for our discussion about transportation disruption and what we are and will experience in the next decade or so. So if you'll show that, please. That's a lovely video, but that's not the right video. But there's a panelist who's very happy about that because it's from his company.
It was not planned.
That's okay. If that's too hard to find, we can just move on. Why don't I introduce our panelists? First of all, I'm Sue Calloway. I'm the senior editor of automotive for Time Inc., which basically means that Fortune, Money, Sports Illustrated, those sorts of publications are where I focus my time and energy on mobility stories. And I'm very honored to have with us Chris Ballinger, who is a Senior Vice President and CFO of Toyota Financial Services, Brian Kelly, Secretary of Transportation for the state of California, Doug Newcomb, who is the founder and president of Connected Car Council and the publisher of the C3 report, Raj Kumar, whose title is so long, I will merely tell you that he's an incredibly important engineer from Carnegie Mellon and is a co-director on several of the projects that they partner with GM on, including autonomous technologies and information technology. And last but not least is Jiraj Vakulik, who is the CEO and co-founder of a company called Aeromobile, which you just got a peek of, an advanced engineering company that is commercializing a flying car. Because we didn't want to keep this two-dimensional. It's such a big subject. I read an interesting study that came out today, and Raj, I thought I might start with you, from the Rand Corporation. And they stated, after a great deal of research of their own, that in order for autonomous cars to be truly safe, 100% safe on our roads, it would require billions of miles of testing and hundreds of years. Do you agree with that?
Let me make maybe take a step backwards and ask about why are we talking about self-driving vehicles? I think the benefits are very significant, the possible benefits, safety benefits, there are productivity benefits, and there are quality of life benefits. What do I mean by that? 1.3 million people die every year due to automotive accidents globally every year. And then most of those accidents, more than 90%, are due to human error, human distraction. If vehicles are driving themselves, those accidents can be mitigated, perhaps prevented over time. With respect to productivity, the average American wastes about work week worth of time, about 35 hours per week, just being stuck in traffic. Right? We are all busy people, but we are wasting time. Productivity is just being stuck. If the vehicle is driving itself, you get to do something productive, including taking a nap. And lastly, people who are legally blind, people who have lost their cognitive privileges, have lost their driver's licenses, their quality of life goes down significantly. So there is actually a significant benefits for basically vehicles to drive themselves. So then the question basically becomes, when does the technology become ready? Right? Turns out that, I guess we heard Eric Schmidt give a very nice talk over lunch. I do think this, I guess he said the technology is ready. I don't think the technology is ready right now for a vehicle to basically drive itself from any point A to any point B that you and I can drive today in the US, for example. So it's going to take some time. I think we have had Google vehicles drive for a few million vehicles, few million miles and so on, but we still need more proof on the ground to get there. I'm not sure we need to be waiting hundreds of years, but I think we'll be getting there in about 10 years or so.
Brian, in your role with the state of California, maybe you can explain to us from your perspective where this conversation around semi-autonomous and autonomous vehicles stands today. There are a lot of them on the road already that people may not understand.
Yeah, in California, we are moving forward on developing regulations for the operations of autonomous vehicles on our roadways. And I think it's important to note that there's a sort of spectrum or phase of development here where I think most people are used to seeing elements of autonomous vehicles in cars as they're coming on the market, things like assisted braking, or I have got something called adaptive cruise control, where you know, if you approach too closely to the car in front of you, it'll automatically slow down for you. There's lane stabilization, there's self-parking, there's a lot that's now sort of coming forward on this. Most of them safety-related items, which, you know, I think are helpful. And you know, we at the state level, at the DMV, they've moved forward on allowing those vehicles to be tested on our roadways through a testing regulation we did in 2014. So 13 manufacturers are now doing full testing of autonomous vehicles. The requirement for the test in our state at this time is that the car have a steering wheel and that the car have a driver during the testing phase of that stage. Then there's what Eric Schmidt alluded to earlier today, for those of you who were at lunch, but the sort of Google pod car, I'm calling it, that many of you may be familiar with and seen, which is ultimately a vision with a vehicle with neither a steering wheel nor a driver, but would be sort of remotely operated. And what we are working to do with the Department of Motor Vehicles here is to move forward on what that regulation could look like in terms of moving that technology forward. And I don't want to predict, you know, how many years away that is to be, you know, on our roadways in a safe and responsible and reasonable way. But I would say that it's incumbent on us to try to lay out a landscape where we can provide some certainty of what the testing landscape could look like, how you can get to operating of a technology like that. And, you know, I'd just say I heard some benefits of autonomous vehicles earlier. I would add that, you know, increasingly you have people who do not have access to mobility today, or difficult access to mobility today. And it seems to me this technology, if it can be, you know, proven and shown to be safe, could mean a great deal for folks who maybe can't drive for whatever reasons. Or I know in California, our demographics going forward are for an increasing graying of the state, if you will, a big uptick in the folks over 55, and that then comes with some issues for driving later in life. And this technology, if it's available, could help people with important access to mobility. So it's a broad scope, and there's a sort of a, you know, moving quickly now on testing regulations and spending a little bit more time to get the operating regulations right, certainly for the technology that does not include either a driver or a steering wheel.
Doug, you have a lot of hands-on, or I should say hands-off experience testing autonomous vehicles, and the benefits are so clear. I think for a lot of people, the distance from today until that time comes when we're really napping in the back is still the big unknown. What are some of the potential downsides that you've seen in the driver's or the passenger driver's seat?
Well, I'm a big proponent. I mean, I've as you said, I've ridden in several autonomous cars, and the first time I did it was in Chicago several years ago. The automotive supplier Continental had put together a demonstration to show self-driving cars, and I was really surprised. And I've ridden in several of them, including Google's, and just how normal it seemed. You know, it seemed like the car was on cruise control. It didn't seem like a really big deal in a sense. But I think that, you know, and people often ask me, when are self-driving cars going to be available? And I often say they're available now. I mean, there's a lot of cars, as Brian was talking about, that, you know, pretty much drive themselves now. I mean, all these layering of driver assist systems, lane keeping, adaptive cruise, emergency autonomous braking. You know, there's cars that can drive themselves. So I think it's just the consumer acceptance, for one thing, is going to have to catch up. Of course, regulation and some of the legal aspects. But, you know, we do a series of conferences for C3 Group. We just did a big event in South by Southwest. And one of the things we're starting to explore is some of the unintended consequences of self-driving cars. Like any technology, there are things that we can't even imagine. You know, think about the internet 20 years ago. You know, things that we cannot foresee, no one can foresee. What's going to happen? One example is cybersecurity, or more specifically, data privacy. I was at an event, ITS World Congress in France back in September, and there was a gentleman I was speaking with, and he was saying, you know, this technology is available now, where say the steering wheel can read your heart rate. It can read your blood sugar level. It can seat can tell how much you weigh, and saying, you know, will this, and this we're talking connected cars, not even autonomous cars, but what's to prevent that data, you know, that information to being sent, say, to your insurance company or to your employer? So you maybe get a message saying, you know, Doug, you're running a fever today. You may not want to come into work.
Or worse, you clearly had a couple too many last night.
Right,
and
exactly.
Your blood alcohol levels are readable.
So,
right?
you know, kind of starting to look at some of those things as far as, I mean, obviously the benefits are clear. You know, the 30,000 people die, 32,000 on highways, and someone mentioned at one of the events we did, I think it was NHTSA Administrator Mark Rosekind, I've heard it over and over, is that would be like a 747 going down every week in this country. And then that's just in the US. I mean, I think if that was happening, people would say, we have to do something about this. There's all those benefits, not to mention the benefits of lost productivity. One company, Enrix, the traffic data, did a study that they figured that a quarter of greenhouse gases come from vehicles. So if we can start to get cars more connected, start to have more autonomous driving where you can have more cars on a freeway, those are some of the benefits that we're going to see. And I think some of the downsides, you know, we don't know what they're going to be, but I think some of those data privacy, obviously cybersecurity is a big issue, but it's going to change things dramatically. And I think one of the downsides I've been reading is body shops. There's going to be a whole, I was just talking to someone today, talking about Uber drivers. I mean, Travis Kalanick has said that that's his goal, is to have self-driving cars. And just last week, Google, it's pretty unprecedented. I heard a lot of talk in DC about it from some of the people in the Connected Car Council in DC. Google, Ford, Volvo, Lyft, and Uber established a coalition to really push for federal regulation on self-driving cars to kind of sidestep this patchwork of state regulation that's going on. So really interesting times, for sure.
Raj, what do you say about all of this data? Who owns it? I mean, with data actually comes revenue at a certain point. So where are you looking to draw the lines in the work you're doing with GM and with Carnegie Mellon?
Sure. So I think there's this ongoing struggle between companies like Google, which has said that they actually want to partner with companies like GM. Last week there was a news item which said that they're probably talking to Fiat Chrysler. Right. And to me, the core conflict between a car maker and an information company is basically who gets to own the data, who gets to monetize that value, right? So
None
GM
of that
said,
is you, by the way, right?
Yes. And GM said, no, I believe, no thank you, and Ford said, no thank you. And then Fiat, I guess, needs the market share and so on. So these dynamics will play out. So the point that Doug mentioned, I think is important to remember. The car is capable of collecting so much information about where you're going, the speeds that you're driving, your biological status and all that. And all of that could actually be very valuable information for somebody, possibly to your detriment. So hopefully we would be able to opt in as opposed to opt out.
Chris, you come from the financial side. We're talking about putting all of this data out there, and I think companies like Toyota are looking to put a whole lot more drivers out there, and also, of course, de facto increase the data as well. What is your business model around shared cars, autonomous cars?
I think nobody knows yet, right? As Doug said, we're in the early days. We're where the internet was 20 years ago, right? Or maybe even 25 or 30 years ago. What we're seeing is the development of the Internet of Matter, right? A packet switching network for things, and the infrastructure is just being put in place. There's all kinds of business models around that, right? Data going in and out of cars, information about how cars are being used, enable services that offer cars by the mile rather than cars by the vehicle. And that's going to be a huge change. There's no financial service products for that, there's no insurance products for that, and those all have to be developed. All of the data about how the car is used has to go along with data that's reliable identity, reputation, small payments, telematics. So Toyota's looking very hard at all of those areas. In fact, we started 2 companies in this last month alone looking at connected car and telematics insurance so that we can be part of providing those services. And it's all about making mobility cheaper and easier and more available and more convenient. You know, you remember all the commercials that the car companies had, the Freedom Machine, people jumping in the air and oh, what a feeling. And it's with the roads as congested and as dangerous as they are, we'd like to bring back that.
I think you mentioned to me that if taken on a global basis, how many people qualify to purchase a new vehicle today?
So for the last 100 years, auto finance has been the ticket to getting into a car, to a new car. 87% of Americans who buy a new car finance it, probably even more because some are getting money from friends and family. So that means if you don't have the income to qualify for a loan, you can't get a new car. So roughly the top half or the top third of the income distribution in the US gets cars, new cars, because they can finance them. And globally, that's probably less than 5%. Now the reason that's important is that if the data can be monetized, if the car can be monetized through offering services, which it can, in fact, right, the amount of money that you can get in an income stream from monetizing the car is now probably a multiple of the car. The eyeballs alone, right, are probably able to pay for the infrastructure. It pays for the infrastructure of the internet. I don't know why it couldn't pay for the infrastructure of the Matternet. But what that means is that all these people who were locked out of that market before, right, can now get in because the monetization can be used as a source of repayment for a loan, right? If I'm willing to drive or opt in to allow the data to be used or allow the eyeballs of the passengers to look at advertising or whatever, I can now get into a car and provide these services.
Brian, that must kind of make you lose sleep at night. I'm sure a lot of things make you lose sleep at night.
Scaring
which I
me
want to
right
hear.
now. No.
It's a lot more people on the roads, even if the car is in better control. How are you looking at those regulatory issues?
Well, you know, I think I was talking to Doug at lunch today about, I've been messing around in transportation policy for 20 years now in California, first in the Senate and now in this job. And I just never have seen or felt the palpable effect of technology in transportation like we do today, not just on autonomous vehicles are certainly one, but, you know, Chris just outlined a way to finance a car that nobody's thought about. You know, now if you monetize the car if you want to voluntarily drive for Uber or Lyft, I suppose, and it's changing the way people are buying and selling cars. It's obviously the autonomous vehicle potential and really turns on its head our vehicle code in California, which relies heavily on personal responsibility behind the wheel. If there's no person behind that wheel, what are you doing with that vehicle code? And so there's a lot of things down the road that we have to look at. But but again, buying and selling a car over the internet, something you know we didn't do for years and years. We have all kinds of regulations associated with buying and selling cars and that whole area of commerce. That's changing in real time. The emergence of Uber and Lyft and companies like those, and what that means in California, whether or not they are a commercial vehicle or something else, whether they have to meet the same regulatory requirements as taxi cabs is a raging argument all over the place here as well. And again, the emergence of technology in the autonomous area, all of it is really causing us to look and change both law and regulation in California, and it's across the board. I mean, it's in all areas of transportation. Basically, while it's got scary elements, I mostly think it's a great opportunity, and the idea of emerging markets, more efficient markets through technology is something I don't think we should necessarily run from, but figure out how to make it work. And again, the great promise of autonomous vehicles. I think our job and really the DMV's tough task, and I got to say the DMV working with NHTSA at the national level, because somebody on the panel mentioned it, but we don't really want a patchwork of 50 different approaches to this around the country. And I'm happy to see that NHTSA has really stepped up its role in this in terms of moving forward on a draft regulation that could apply for 50 states that they're working on with the National Association now. They're going to later this year, probably in the summer, they'll be likely putting out guidance to states on regulations over autonomous vehicles and the operating guidelines for those. And really, they're going to set I think they're going to set more than any state will, the relationship and the communication, the requirement between manufacturers and the government as this technology progresses. So, you know, it's touching all parts of our world. And in some ways, we're trying to keep up, and in some ways, we're trying to, you know, shape it as best we can to make sure it's reasonable and meeting people's needs as we go forward.
Well, I think, Raj, you said it, you know, autonomous vehicles, connectivity, these are all innovations that bring us freedom. And Jiraj, I'm not leaving you out. You are literally bringing a new dimension to this conversation, airspace. So if freedom is mobility, how you want it, when you want it, where you want it, and to be free from constraints of traffic and traditional patterns of transportation, you're hitting on something that probably is going to really keep this guy up at night. But tell us a little bit about your vision and how that fits into all of this.
Thanks. Really, as I'm representing on the panel this Beyond from the title, our vision is really a bit broader and maybe bolder. Of course, what I deeply believe that all of us, we deserve much better transportation, safer, faster, much more efficient, and we need to move transportation from two-dimensional space into the three-dimensional space. Of course, it's not easy. It must be done in 3 steps. First, it's product and technology itself, then certification, and then infrastructure. It's slowly happening. What we are deeply believing that adoption could come much faster from the air to the ground, because people are quite used for something called autopilot for a pretty long time, and a lot of technologies are already applied in the air, like collision analysis and obstacles and all these kind of things which are used there could be the first step into what we are calling not just the self-driving car, but the self-flying car. And of course, this dream was here for over 100 years. There was more than 100 trials, both in startups, in big industrial companies. We are very proud and happy that we have a really functional prototype of the 4th generation. We are now working closely with certificators, with the government in Europe, and we are preparing really the final product for the market. And of course, this will be done not overnight. It still needs a lot of research, and at the same moment we are trying to combine existing infrastructure, which is already here, especially in the US. There is so many airstrips, small private airports which could be used, and there was a recent study from NASA which was studying Silicon Valley and Bay Area, and if something like flying cars will be adopted, the whole transportation will be 3 times more efficient and safer, and this will have a very positive impact both economically and also from affordability for the people to have such a solution. So we are working on this goal, how to move transportation from 2-dimensional into the 3-dimensional space.
Raj, what do you think? Or Doug, what do you think?
Can I add something? Something that Brian said earlier about, and I think of it in the context when we were talking about self-driving cars, but really we were talking about this at lunch, and I've been covering this space for a long time, so I know I've drank the Kool-Aid, but I really believe that what we're seeing now is the same way technology has transformed pretty much everything, every industry. I know my industry, media, music, medicine, on and on. I really feel like we're at the point now where we're going to see these huge transformations and disruptions, and we're already starting to see it. Look with Uber, with what's doing to the taxi industry, but I think we're only at the beginning of seeing how technology is going to disrupt transportation. So I think kind of looking at it, not only self-driving cars, but connected cars. At South by Southwest, we did a panel, my company did, on Fact or Myth, was the title, Self-Driving Cars in the Hyperloop. And John Suh from Hyundai Ventures showed a whole presentation about flying cars, but one of the things he showed was a self-driving pod, kind of like the Google car, that could drive you to one of these airstrips, and he mentioned that too, how many airstrips are underutilized. And your self-driving car would connect to this flying part of the car to take you where you want to go. I mean, it seems sort of fantastical, but It's very feasible. Yeah.
But this could be the first step, but still you need a multimodal system, and you need to combine different modes and different modules for transportation, and our vision is to have one technology, one object which will be able really door to door to transport you to the final destination. And really I like your comment on technology, how it's really disrupting everything, and the actual car, it's just a computer on 4 wheels.
Yeah.
And if the next technology will be added on that, which for us it's plain, it will be just better final product.
And you have to think of it in the context too of what we're seeing, not only again with self-driving cars, but there's other trends, like I think it was last year or year before, public transportation ridership was just off the charts, more than it had ever been. I remember reading a story about it and saying Phoenix had like this really high ridership on their, and it just surprised me. It's like, so you're starting to see a lot of young people. I was talking to a guy today who lives here in Los Angeles and doesn't own a car. He just takes, ride-sharing services everywhere. So I think if you look at it in the context of some of the social things that are going on, some of the technology things, and the last thing I want to say is that I was at this event where Secretary Fox was speaking about regulation, and our transportation secretary, and he was saying that it's so difficult, to Brian's point, to keep up because the technology is moving so fast and regulation and policy moves not quite as fast. That's, I think, going to be one of the big challenges we'll see.
Brian, how do you try to keep up? I mean, sure,
Well, I
it's
can tell you
about to
that-
put flying cars
Yeah.
in your airspace.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I can
That's
tell
the
you with
FAA,
some
yeah.
certainty that the DMV regulations later this year will not address the flying car. I think we may be partnering with the FAA on that, but no. I'm sorry, what was your question?
I think you answered it. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I read recently, and I wonder if people here will agree with this, and certainly on the panel, that the tip of the iceberg in terms of all of this new technology are companies like Google, Apple, Tesla, Uber, and they're already giants in this space, but that there's the opportunity for so many more giants to come along. How do you find them? If you're an investor, if you're an interested party, what are you all looking at in these new and upcoming companies that signal to you success?
Well, I think one thing we're seeing a lot of is really big investments in artificial intelligence. I know Toyota, for example, just made a huge announcement working with people at MIT, their C-Cell program, brought on Dr. Gil Pratt from DARPA. So I think that's one of the things we're seeing a lot of, and I think that also fits with machine learning as well. I think we're starting to see a lot of activity in that space as well.
Raj?
Yeah, if I could add, I think there are a couple of very interesting forces at work. The first is that information technology companies like the ones that you mentioned, Apple, Google, Uber, if you will, basically want to come in and begin to dominate this space by disrupting the market. And then meanwhile, the established car makers around the world, including GM, Ford, and Toyota, kind of now actually fear that their lunch could be taken away by these information technology companies. That being said, I do think that the information technology companies vastly underestimate the complexity and risk of basically playing in this space. Going back to 2013-14, GM lost about $4.1 billion because basically an ignition switch part, which cost less than $1, basically was faulty in nature, and it ends up being a $4.1 billion loss, literally 8-9 years after the fact. Right? So small thing goes on, NHTSA can basically step in and say, thou shalt stop selling that car. Right? So, and basically you have to all the profits from your extra years suddenly disappear. So that competition between really two giant industries happening as we speak. And meanwhile, when these things are happening, it is fertile territory for startups to basically sprout up and basically show their mettle. I guess not to blow my own horn, we did launch a spin-off named Automatica in late 2013. Last year it was snapped up very quickly just after 18 months of existence by Delphi. So I think there's lots of opportunities in this space all around.
Do you have a lot of, you work with OEMs. I know Uber stole some of your team a year ago. how do you see the universities as the hotbed? I mean, we're talking about MIT, Stanford, Carnegie Mellon. Are you protective of your IP and your teams?
So let's go back to one event that is worth highlighting. In 2006, DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, announced a so-called DARPA Urban Challenge, where vehicles without anybody in them ought to drive for about 60 miles in fewer than 6 hours in an urban-like setting, interacting with other autonomous vehicles as well as human-driven vehicles, and obey the same rules of the road that you and I have to obey, right? And so that, to me, was the seminal moment in this history of the long sequence of autonomous vehicle concepts and so on, which showed beyond a shadow of doubt that this technology is only a question of when, not if, for commercial adoption. And it turns out that a couple of the observations kind of stand out with respect to the competition. 6 teams completed the competition, and it turns out that all those 6 teams actually came from universities, number one. And number 2, all of them came from universities based in the US. Right? So I'm not trying to denigrate companies. Companies are great at, of course, engineering, making sure that they're reliable, affordable, maintainable, and all that. But with respect to coming up with creative ideas and making them basically at least work in a prototype sense, universities, I think US universities, are the place where there's basically a talent hunt going on from companies at universities. You mentioned Uber. Hiring 40 staff members from an entity called the National Robotic Engineering Center at Carnegie Mellon. They used to work on government projects and construction projects with companies like Caterpillar. So we did lose a sizable chunk, but we actually think of that as basically as a feather in our cap. It basically, to us, illustrates that Carnegie Mellon, with its robotics skill sets, is the place to be. Because they actually started an advanced technology center in Pittsburgh, apparently around 300 people, going up to 400 people.
Chris, what is your OEM
What's my take
side
on it?
of that?
So you mentioned the tip of the iceberg. So Uber's worth $65 billion or so, more than any OEM except for Toyota. So there's an enormous amount of capital going in, an enormous amount of investment. I think that the autonomous technology is the sexy part, but I think it's rare that technology really makes the difference, right? It's very often things like network effects and software and who has the platform and who can capture the economies of scale of an early technology. The second thing I'd say is that what's going on is happening along 3 axes, right? The future is shared, autonomous, and connected. And there's a lot more progress being made on the connected and on the shared axis than on the autonomy, although the autonomy is moving very rapidly. If you've ever ridden in an Uber or had an Amazon package delivered, you've already taken advantage of the shared, autonomous, connected future. It's just that the car, if you ordered an Uber, you've had an autonomous taxi. It's just that the software was biological rather than silicon. But the experience, right, is roughly similar. You order it up, it arrives in 30 seconds or a few minutes, and it takes you where you want to go. So there's an enormous opportunity, I think, in all of the other areas, the connected area, the shared, that I think make maybe better investments than the technology itself. Now, maybe that's just because I'm not an engineer and I'm in financial services. Right? If you're a hammer, you tend to see the world as nails. And maybe
He'll
that's
be
why I
offering
have that
discounts
view.
later.
But there's one final thing. Well, I'll stop it there. Thanks.
So let's broaden beyond the U.S. a little bit, since we're up in the air and have global presences here, and I think this affects us right down to the state level. We are seeing manufacturing and hardware, software in India, China, places with huge growing populations globally, being able to come online very quickly. What do some of you see as the future globally for these technologies, and who do you think will be the key players short term, long term? Nobody wants to answer that.
So I guess I guess I could say the following: pretty much every global car maker today is very interested in this space, connected and automated space. Everybody is investing lots and lots of resources, hiring wherever they can actually find the appropriate people. So that's happening at the car maker level. And then meanwhile, I guess those of us who understand the automotive industry understand there's basically a huge supply chain as well. That are basically huge tier 1 suppliers who are themselves giants by their own making. And they're interested in basically saying, hey, can we be the core component suppliers in this space? So the tier 1 suppliers playing a large role. And meanwhile, basically all these startups basically trying to feed them. So that's happening at one level. And meanwhile, if you look at the so-called information technology suppliers, consulting companies like Tata come to mind, HCL come to mind. They are also basically saying, hey, can we create some IP here so that actually we can go way beyond the consulting service that we've been providing in the past. So now it's pretty much free for all, because the technology is not established out there. And as I said earlier, I think it's going to take several more years for the technology to actually to be deployed on a day-to-day basis. So basically opens up a huge, vast opportunity for lots and lots of companies around. So it's going to be dynamic for quite some time.
Yeah, I would agree. Just that I've never seen a time like this in automotive where I think there's so much opportunity for smaller companies, for outside companies. And Ford and GM have opened their dashboards for like third-party developers. You're seeing, I mean, like just recently, GM bought Cruise Automation, which is a small startup company, just a couple of years ago. So I think that before, at least from my perspective, you had the structure where you had these major tier 1 suppliers, and it was really hard to get your foot in the door. And I think that that's one of the things that technology is changing. But to address your question about what's happening on a global scale, when you're seeing companies like Ford at CES last year, Mark Fields didn't announce any product. What he announced was Ford Smart Mobility, where these 25 experiments they're doing around the world, from like a monsoon alert in India to figuring out how to navigate places where there aren't roads to deliver medical supplies. But I think the bottom line on that is, they're looking at it on a global scale. And anyone who's been to China or to India or Brazil and seen what traffic is like there, the fundamental issue of getting people from point A to point B is not changing. We're seeing a lot of kind of activity around these mega cities that are expected to grow, and I think that that's what Ford and some of these other companies are looking at. A couple of things. One is when Bill Ford says, the great-great-grandson, I think, of Henry Ford, says recently that we're not going to put 2 cars in every garage in India. That's impossible to do. I mean, that gives you an indication of how quickly things are changing. And I always come back to this moment. Several years ago, I was testing the new BMW i3 in Amsterdam. And I'll never forget, I was driving with one of the editors from Motor Trend, and he was just really upset that we weren't on some great, mountain road. They had us drive it in Amsterdam because they wanted to show how this vehicle would fit in the city. It's a city vehicle, and one of the capabilities it has in Europe, and I think they're planning to bring it here, is a multimodal transportation app. So you're driving your i3 into Amsterdam or some other city, and it tells you, hey, traffic is heavy ahead. If you get off here and jump on the train, you'll save a half hour. And I'm thinking, wow, BMW, the ultimate driving machine, is telling you to park your car and get on the train. I think that's, to me, was like a moment where I thought things are really changing. And to give you an idea of the global perspective of what, and I think a lot of it has to do with people trying to get around in these mega cities. And technology, autonomous, connected, what have you, connected mobility can solve some of these issues.
You mentioned the BMW i3, and I think we enjoy here in California a greater infrastructure for charging electric vehicles than other parts of the country. Certainly the coasts both enjoy that. How many people here have an EV or a plug-in hybrid? Anybody? Okay.
Pretty good, California.
All right, few, it's good, it's good. Let's talk a little bit, Brian, about infrastructure and the role of the state versus private companies. I know Tesla's invested heavily in this. How do you look at that going forward, and where do you think we really stand as a state as a whole?
Well, again, I see opportunity to fulfill some of our policy objectives. California is a state that not only do we have economic and mobility goals in transportation to move a lot of people through the system, but we also have a state by policy and law that we have to meet certain emission requirements, and specifically in California related to GHG emissions. And we are going to rely heavily on technology to help us get there through cleaner vehicles. The governor signed a executive order and an agreement with other states to try to get 1.5 million electric vehicles on the road by 2025, or 2025, I think it is. And as we move toward connected vehicles and autonomous vehicles, infrastructure itself may have to be built differently that can signal better with the vehicles that are using that infrastructure, and so that may change the way we're building things like streets and roads and bridges. And I think that does fall on the state side, those infrastructure elements. I think what's in the vehicle technology itself is sort of on the manufacturer side, but how the infrastructure can relate to it and help those vehicles operate in a way that we are achieving those broader policy objectives. I think it's important that we are part of that answer. So I see it affecting how what we build and how we build going forward. Just going back to one other thing, I joked earlier about the flying car, but I want to say that the point of it was trying to ease the ride, or sort of one provider from door to door. And I got to say, I'm a little less bullish than I think Doug is on public transit as it currently stands in California. The ridership numbers to me aren't what you'd like to see for the investment we've made over the last several decades. And I think in part because it's still not as easy and as seamless and as connected as it should be for the taker. And there are emerging technologies. There's work in the peninsula up in the Northern California with Caltrain on an idea to provide a service called Caltrain Plus that would incorporate car sharing to help you go from the home to the transit center, and then on the transit center you use your app to hit your connection point when you get off. The idea is it's becoming less of a station-to-station thing and more of a home-to-home or door-to-door thing, and I think technology's going to play a big part in that, and the rise of these shared services will be a big part of that. So to me, and obviously I'm not in a roller position to pick winners on the technology side, but I do think that people still want in transportation the most reliable, efficient way to get from point A to point B. And I think the technology points and the application of that technology to help them achieve that is who's going to win. And so there's a lot of ways to come at this, but I think ultimately that's still the end game.
As long as the Wi-Fi doesn't go out.
If I may add on that, because from our point, this is exactly the point that is not only about the cars. What we need, and more philosophically, we need two things at the same time: reduction. In the cities, in the centers of the cities, we need reduction, less cars, better utilized, better organized, better used. And between the cities, we need expansion. We need more transportation solutions as we have at the moment. So I was happy that Doug mentioned also Hyperloop, because it's another, of course, an option for the future transportation. So once these two innovation fields will be organized and harmonized at the same time, reduction in the cities and expansions between the cities, we will have much better transportation solutions in the future.
On the question of public transportation and the relationship of public transportation to mobility, it's important to recognize that public transportation is a complement, not a substitute for the new mobility services, right? You could see an expansion of car sharing, ride sharing, and public transit all going together.
Good point, absolutely. I'd like to open it up to questions from the audience. I think we've got a lot of brain power up here across a lot of different realms within the future. So if I can't see you, please, and I think they're going to bring you a microphone.
He's going to go first, and then you're next.
Doug, you mentioned, or you alluded just a moment ago to the benefits that we might see from some of this technology in places like India. Traditionally, I think if we look back at history, we find that third world countries or developing countries are laggards in taking up this sort of technology. Human beings are inexpensive, machinery is expensive. Do you see anything in this technology that suggests that developing countries are going to be particularly quick at taking up this sort of technology, or do we risk seeing yet another form of digital divide between rich countries and poor as any of these aspects of automated transport are rolled out?
Yeah, good question. Just on self-driving, I know that recently I've been reporting on and reading that China is moving very quickly to put in place a regulatory environment, and also with some of the companies like Beidou and others that are working on self-driving cars. And kind of the takeaway was, for me, was that they're going to move very quickly because they have a much more, how you would put it, maybe flexible or regulatory environment.
Less infrastructure.
Right, and there's also, I know that Germany has made it a top priority. I mean, you're starting to see countries sort of say, we want to take the lead on this. But as far as, it's a good question. I mean, as far as how this is going to develop in, say, like India, I think that kind of what we were saying earlier about, people want to get from point A to point B in the, easiest, most economical, efficient way possible, and have Wi-Fi when they're doing it, or stay connected. So I think that, if someone in Mumbai or what have you, if they have access to some of this technology, whether it's self-driving cars or otherwise, I think that that's really kind of where the rubber meets the road. One thing that Chris was talking about was multimodal transportation. We're seeing a lot of these pieces being tied together, where Daimler has been making a lot of investments in that space with Movell and some other companies, Ride Scout, where you have an app that tells you, okay, I need to get from here to there. I can, get an Uber from here to the station, and then from the station to this station, then maybe I can pick up a bike to go from here, so it's going to take a walk. So you're starting to see this where it makes it easier. You don't have to go and figure out what's the train schedule and where is, bikes or what have you. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that in some of the things that I'm seeing from Ford, for example, or looking at it from a global scale. And the last thing is, speaking of infrastructure, I was in Gothenburg, Sweden, where Volvo was doing this 100 vehicle autonomous test. And again, they're working closely with the government, have a lot of support, but we're going to see a lot of infrastructure changes too. And they're saying we'll see a lot of changes to even the way cities are designed. If we don't have to have these huge parking lots and parking structures. So I think we're going to see changes in that way too.
Can I take a crack at that one? So Africa, some countries in Africa leapfrog the landlines by going directly to mobile. I think in China and India and Southeast Asia, what you're going to see is leapfrogging private ownership of cars and going right to mobility services.
I agree.
I don't necessarily think that that's going to be to autonomous cars, because labor is cheap in those places, and the Uber model with a driver maybe makes more sense for the near future.
Yeah, I would make 2 additional comments. When I go to India, I do not drive. More precisely, I cannot drive. So when you have actually lane markers on the road, they are merely suggestions. Somebody actually told me they're not even suggestions, they're just decorations on the road. So basically, so that the driving ethic or lack thereof, it's just impossible for somebody to live with, even though I was born and raised there. I just cannot deal with it. So autonomous technology is going to have to evolve quite a bit. That's really the grand challenge. If basically an autonomous vehicle can actually drive without hitting anybody or anything in Mumbai during peak hour traffic, we are there. Number one. So the number, I would also say the following. With respect to this technology over time to be developed, tested, and so on, you need hundreds, if not thousands of engineers. China has basically had an autonomous vehicle competition for several years. They've been developing the personnel, the workforce, and then India actually has hundreds, thousands of engineers graduating every year. So the workforce out there could actually play a major role in the global technology space.
Yes.
Yeah, with no one argues that this is a bad idea. I think it's better for people, better for humanity. With the working class, there's going to be a displacement. That's kind of an obvious thing that's coming. but there's also going to be many new jobs created as well. How do you think about that displacement, and will a truck driver be able to be retrained for the new shift, or are we watching a potential generation become obsolete?
I would say, yeah. I mean, that's, as I mentioned earlier, we're starting to look at a lot of the unintended consequences of self-driving cars. But yeah, and the trucking industry, last year I had a chance to drive in a ride-in Freightliner's new autonomous truck. And that, in many ways, and I know with telematics, that was a lot of the connectivity that really starts in the commercial space. So think about if you know, trucking companies and those type of things can eliminate the driver, or at least, you know, they're saying now have the driver do different things behind the wheel, then that could be huge savings. But like in you know, as I mentioned earlier, the way technology transforms every industry, my industry, media, it's you know, there's going to be a lot of casualties in a sense because of that.
There are algorithms that write articles today.
Right.
So I would say it's a bad news, good news situation. The bad news is that when this technology becomes mature, gets deployed on a massive scale, it would clearly disrupt driver jobs for trucks, for buses, for cabs, shuttles. There's a long list. And of course, it will clearly impact the hotel industry, where it hosts drivers at truck stops and so on. So these could be major disruptions, if you will. The good news, I think, is twofold. One is that this is not going to happen overnight. Even when these technologies get deployed for the first couple of years, you would probably want to actually have a human behind the driver, even though the vehicle is driving itself, just to make sure that the technology bugs are worked out before the driver is taken out of the equation. But more importantly, so let's look at some historical facts. If you go back to the beginning of the 20th century, my understanding is that most women basically stayed at home. Today, as we sit here, women outnumber men in the workforce, and we have 5%. So the workforce has doubled, but we have 5% unemployment. The economy finds a way, right? So maybe these people actually lost their jobs, get trained, or otherwise just due to various pressures, they end up basically diagnosing, fixing this high technology equipment, cameras, radars, lasers, computers, and so on. So maybe they end up with with better paying jobs over time.
That's optimistic. I like it.
My question has to do with taxis, specifically the value of taxi medallions. And if we take a market like New York City, where we could be the most optimistic, I'm curious if you have views on what the value of the taxi system and taxi medallions may be going forward.
Anybody want to
So
say that?
we'll have a question for you. And I'll give you some facts first. In San Francisco, between October of 2014 and October of 2015, taxi revenues dropped by about $50 million, from about 200 to about $150 million. So what is your guess about the increase in Uber revenues over the same time? Right. Most people would say, oh, they took it, 50 million. But the truth is, the Uber revenues went up by about $1 billion. And so the moral of that is Uber, because of the convenience and price, not only substituted for taxis, but much more created new demand. And so while I think there's some substitution going on, and I think there's some substitution for our product as well, people are leaving their cars in garages, and I'm worried about that. But I think the bigger story, the much bigger story, is that there's a whole new industry developing that's not a substitute for what's out there, but provides mobility to seniors, children, handicapped, people who don't have the means to afford a car, and that's coming on top of taxis, and it's complementary in some ways to taxis, to ride sharing, to car sharing, to public transportation.
There was an interesting story in the Boston Globe, I think it was, about the taxi company there and the drop in the cost of medallions. It was just very dramatic how over the course of the year or whatever, the drop in the price of these medallions.
Yeah. An economist would say that whatever is lost in the price of taxi medallions is more than made up in consumer welfare. Yeah.
Yes.
Hello, panel. I've got a quick question, please. Our area of interest is infrastructure investment for institutional investors and this new emerging theme. We've looked at investing in charging stations, and that's extremely expensive. I would appreciate the panel's thoughts on how institutional investors can invest in this opportunity. We're not interested in the technology side. We're more interested in long-term stable income from this opportunity, and I'd be particularly interested in Brian's thoughts as well. Where should risk lie on the state and on private investors? Thank you.
Downtown parking has been the best investment for the last 30 years or so. It probably won't be for the next 30.
Yeah, I'm not sure, because I think that the pace of the technology drives the necessary infrastructure, and we have lofty goals for the expansion of EVs in California, and we have programs that help make sure that the infrastructure is in place through state assistance for the development of the proper infrastructure. As I said, we're trying to achieve several policy objectives. But I don't know if I could advise or give investment advice on this. It really depends on, as I said, how quickly the vehicle technology moves along, and how the state, how our infrastructure is ready to sort of meet that and develop it. As I said, in California, we have sort of lofty objectives for. But important ones, and we hope reachable ones for more EVs on our roads that will require new technology. And we, as I said, provide several various state programs to help that development move forward. But beyond that, I don't know much more.
Yeah, I would mention two topics perhaps. One is, so maybe an investor could basically look at trying to support corridors which are dedicated to autonomous vehicles, an example. So basically you would take on maintenance of the roads, making sure the lane markers are correct so the vehicles can basically know where they are and such. So that's one avenue to explore. The other avenue is basically a lot of activity today in the domain of so-called smart cities, where basically you can actually sense things around the city and then feed that back to users and such. And you can basically have traffic lights, construction zones, construction zone workers, for example, being able to communicate with the vehicles and people around them. And that could possibly be another area of investment from a physical infrastructure point of view.
Yeah. Even some of the things that I saw at CES where people were talking about around smart cities, like for example, AT&T was talking about how even going beyond just transportation infrastructure, where it can help cities manage things like water, the water systems, and even think about this, even like where sensors can hear gunshot detection and know where to send police and things like that. The other thing I think is going to be very important, at least autonomous cars already is, and you've seen big investments, is in mapping, digital mapping. Last year, the 3 German automakers banded together to purchase here mapping. So I think that's one thing. And I really think the payoff for a lot of this is the data. You mentioned that earlier. I'm convinced that's what Apple's kind of end game in this is and it's pretty clear that the data, where you are, when you're there, all those things I think are going to be very valuable down the road.
Brian?
I just wanted to add that one thing that California did beginning in 2006 was focus more attention and public investment on trade corridors. And in California, those are very important corridors for our economy. We've got, I think, 3 of the 5 largest seaports in the country. I think we have more miles of railroad than any other state. And so trade corridors is a place in California where we're going to see heightened policy focus, perhaps looking for public-private partnerships, and I would say an increasing look at finding ways to encourage cleaner, more efficient technologies in those corridors. So I would just reference that we're spending a lot of time on that these days, and I think we'll do more of that in the years to come.
Final, very quick question. We're out of time.
In those cases where preliminary cars have been out on the road, what has been the safety record?
Autonomous cars?
Yes.
Yeah.
One at-fault accident. one Google car had an at-fault accident when it had a fender bender with a bus. All the other accidents with Google cars have been the other car's fault.
And they've put more than 1.5 million miles on.
Yeah, I would
Too
say,
many miles.
through our testing regime, we ask for reports on two things. Accident reports immediately when they happen, and then annually, if there's been any disengagement of the, unexpected disengagement of the autonomous technology. And through the first year, there were 12 total accidents. I think one was definitively at fault, and then there's been several, hundreds of disengagements, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing or a pejorative on the technology. It just means that real world things occurred and they had to disengage the vehicle.
Where it's not the autonomous car's fault, and it is the driver's fault, it is a consequence of having an autonomous car out there. How does that factor in?
We're gonna have to cut this.
I'm sorry.
I think we're being cut off.
I think I think we're gonna have to take that one up at the back of the room. I think
Yeah,
it's.
happy to talk to him. I'm sorry.
Thank you all very much. Thanks to my panelists.